Hi there, welcome to this build of a 65-inch wingspan Great Plains Trainer 60. Now as you can see, this is starting to come along really well now, and it's getting really exciting every stage we do as it just gets more and more like a plane. Now in the last video we got the sheeting finished on the wings and the shear webbing in and the attachment points for the wing to be held down onto the fuselage. Now before we can actually fit the wing to the fuselage, get those wing saddles nicely shaped and get the incidence right, we've got one more job that we need to do. We need to get the sheeting on the central section of the wing, top and bottom, which the wing is going to actually sit on onto the fuselage, so we can't fit it to the fuselage until it's there, of course. So we need to get that sheeting, top and bottom, and we need to get the aileron servos fitted into the wing because they're going to be in that sheeting. Now originally, on the original plans I've got here on the wall behind me, there was just a single central servo and there were pull rods in the centre to operate the ailerons. Well, I'm going to do away with that, and I'm going to have two independent servos, and I'm going to mount them fairly close into the fuselage to keep the weight away from that wingtip. The more weight we have centrally, the more responsive our plane will be. So anyway, I'll move the camera around and we'll have a look at what I'm thinking of doing, and then we'll get on and do it. Right, we're looking at the underside of the plane here, underside of the wings, fuselage, and this is the front leading edge. Now the sheeting goes in the first two bays on either side of the wing, so basically we're sheeting from there to there, and that's on the bottom and also on the top surface. But before we can do that, we need to think about the aileron servos. Now we're doing away with that central servo. The ailerons are full length, and you can see a line here where the aileron comes along and finishes there, and then there's a small piece of leading edge to go in. So I want to have the horn for the aileron servo around this area here because I want to have the servo in this bay, keeping it fairly close to the fuselage. But here I've got a hinge, I'm going to have a robot hinge in there, and I don't want the horn to be attached around here on the aileron anyway, and it interfering with this hinge and compromising that. So I'm planning to have the horn around this point here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the servo centrally within this rear portion of the wing, round about there like that, to operate that aileron, and of course the same the other side. Now I'm going to make a plate to hold this. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. This is a technique that you'll see a lot on planes. I'm just going to have a slot in a piece of 3mm birch ply plywood, and that is going to be set down in the ribs so it's flush with this edge of the ribs, the bottom edge of the ribs there, and then I've got the sheeting which will just ride over the top of that and give it some strength. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create these plates and see how that works out, and we'll come back and have a look at that. I don't think there's any point in putting the servos in the wings and having plates so they're hidden. After all, this is a fairly simple trainer, so I think that is probably the best solution, and it's certainly the lightest and easiest solution. And one other thing I should say is that by placing the servo here, I'm avoiding the wheels because I'm anticipating that the landing gear is going to come out and the wheels are going to be roughly around this location. Now if I put the servo there, which is possibly a better place to have it because you're more centrally on the aileron, and so less chance of it twisting perhaps, this might be a better location, but it would get splashed and mud thrown on it, the servo will, from the wheels, from the landing gear. So by having it here, hopefully we're protecting that a little bit and keeping it away from the dirt and water. I've got both servo plates finished and recessed into the ribs, and that's nice and flush with that bottom edge of the rib there, so it'll allow the sheeting to go on there uninterrupted. And I think they're quite well located because the linkage from the servo arm will come down here to a horn in the aileron, which will not only miss the robot hinge there, but it's a decent way in from the end of the aileron. So I think that should work quite nicely. Now, I've also done a piece of sheeting for this side of the wing, and I've labelled it forward, right, bottom, so at least I won't get things mixed up. Now this fits on quite nice and snug and is ready to be glued in place, but before I do that, just remove this. Before I do that, I need to think about cutting the hole for the servo, and if we have a look underneath, I have already marked it. I've just put a pencil line around the cutout, and if we turn that back, we can see easy enough to cut out. But what I will do is I'll not only cut the slot, I will cut a little bit further at each end just to accommodate the lugs from the servo, and so the whole all of the servo lugs will be screwed onto the plywood, but they will be just below the level of the Balsa. What I think I might do as well is just put a very small piece of plywood on the back of these at either end, just a very short length like that, to double up this, thicken it up and allow the screws to hold that are holding the servos to get a better purchase. I mean, they'd probably be alright in this 3mm Balsa, to be honest, but a little bit of plywood at either end just to hold those, give those screws more purchase, I think will be a benefit. Now, when we put on the sheeting like this piece here, we need to think about the overlap that we're getting of the sheeting over the rib. Rather than just putting it on and just thinking any old overlap, we need to mimic what we're getting with the cap strip. If we don't, and we do this overhang here of the Balsa more or less, we're going to get a different sized gap. I know this is obvious, but we might not think about it at the time. So we need to make sure we get consistent gaps when we do the cap strips, and obviously that is a big part of it. I'm now going to get the sheeting finished on the other side, on the top of the wing, and then I've got all these cap strips I cut ages ago, all ready to be trimmed up and glued in place. A quick update as to where I've got so far. I've got the sheeting finished on the underside, with the exception of just here, I'll get to in a second, but I've got that sheeting finished and all of the cap strips on both sides. I've got the plywood plates nicely mounted now, and just move that in so you can see. And I've also cut these holes in here and a little bit of bracing around just to give that some strength on the sheeting, and those holes allow the cables from the servos to come down into the fuselage. Servos are a tight fit, but not too tight, go in and out quite easily, but a nice snug fit. And I've also put in a slot in the wing just here where the cable threads through. It's only going through a single rib from here to here, so it's quite an easy thread. Now, I haven't done this bit here because I haven't wanted to glue these dowels in yet. I still want to have these so that I can move them around, take them out if necessary, and I will only glue them once I've fitted the wing and we fitted the former into the fuselage. So I'm going to leave those mobile for the moment. Now, looking on this side, because I want to leave those dowels unglued until I've got the wing fitted, I need access to the dowels at the back here to glue them at that point. So I'm not going to do the sheeting or the cap strips on the top until the wing's fitted. You can see there, better if I hold that up, what's gone on with the plywood plates and the bracing around there. Now, not having that sheeting on isn't going to make any difference to fitting the wings. Top wing plane, and they sit on the fuselage on the top. But what I do need to do before I can fit the fuselage, the last job I've got to do in this video, is to do a central section of fiberglass down that middle portion to give it a bit more strength. To be honest, now I've put in the dihedral brace, the brace at the front, I probably can get away without doing the fiberglass. I probably don't need it. But the fiberglass will give it a tremendous amount of strength. It's easy to do, it won't add much to the weight. So I'm going to do it anyway, and just, it'll be strong enough. Make it nice and strong, I mean to say. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this section and just leave around this area here, and I'll finish that at a later date once I've got these glued. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up for the fiberglass now, and we'll have a look at that as we do it. Right, well, I've cut myself a piece of glass fibre cloth. This is 3-ounce cloth, and the first thing I always think when somebody shows me something like this is, what was the product? And so if I just show you that, that is what it is from the World Models, just fiberglass cloth. Now, I've laid this out, and to cut this I've just used a pair of really good scissors, and it cuts quite nicely with good scissors. But the less you handle this, the better, because this stuff frays like anything. You only have to look at it and it starts fraying. So the less we touch it, the better. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the CA, and I'm just going to tack the corners and a couple of places along the length, just to hold this down. And then I'm going to mix up some, I've got some I haven't got any finishing resin, so I'm going to use my 30-minute Zap epoxy with a little bit of alcohol, and I'm just going to brush a very thin coat on. And once that has set, I will then possibly give it a light sand, or I may just go ahead and put a second coat on. I'll see what that first coat looks like. When this is all finished, I will be able to just take my scalpel and just cut out those holes again. That'll come out really easily. Now, I'm obviously avoiding this central section, but I'm doing the bit down here where the fuselage is going to sit. And I will, as I said earlier, I will lap that over and do that another time once I've glued this and got everything fitted. So I'll get on and do that now. Well, I now have the wing ready to fit. I've done enough of the work, which is essentially finishing off this underside where it's going to sit down onto the fuselage. I've fiberglassed that, as you saw, and I've given that 2 coats of epoxy, thin down epoxy. I did a single coat, sanded it, and then another coat. It's really nice and smooth now, but I am going to give it a very fine finishing sand before the fitment. I mean, the whole wing itself needs a really good sand, and particularly the leading edge profiling. I've profiled it around here where it fits to the fuselage, but not worried about the rest of the wings. And of course, we've still got the top to finish and the dowels to be glued in. But that will all be done after I've fitted the wing to the fuselage, which is going to be the next video in this series, in this build series. And to be honest, once we get that done and start to get that wing fitted, it's going to be really exciting, because I think things will start to come together quite quickly now, and this plane is really going to start to take shape. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and see how we fit these wings to the fuselage and get that incident just right.